Hey everyone, my name is Brent Shively and I'm the Product and Application Trainer here at Festool USA. In this video series, we're going to be building an outdoor side table out of cypress. And I'll share tips and tricks for best utilizing the TSC 55 parallel guides, the Capex KS 120, Domino DF 500, the Vaxis, CMS routing table and the OF 1400 router, the MFK 700, and the ETS EC 150 and DTS 125 sanders. Let's get to it. The material that I'm going to be using for this table is cypress. When I purchased it, it was 5/4 material. I ran it through my thickness planer and brought it down to about 7/8 of an inch. So now that we've got that surfaced on both sides, I can go ahead and take my guide rail and my TSC and rip down the edge to give me a nice clean edge with the 28 tooth ripping blade, and then we'll utilize the parallel guides to rip down those pieces of material to specific widths. All right, so now that we're ready to cut, I've got 2 Bluetooth batteries in here. I've gone ahead and paired those to my dust extractor. If you want to know more about how to do that, head over to our YouTube channel where I've done a setup video on those. All right, let's make a cut. So now I've got the parallel guides set up on here. They've already been calibrated a while ago. If you need more information on how to calibrate them, you can head over to Festool USA YouTube channel, and there's videos on there on how to calibrate them. So I just need to pull that back. My 2 stops are engaged. I can make my cut. So I've got my parallel guide set. We're ready to cut. A little tip, when you go to set your TSC back down, make sure you always push your clear plastic viewing window back down because that'll help with the dust extraction. So this first rip, we're going to do 2 of them at 2 3/4 of an inch. So as I was making that cut, this is a prime example of one reason that we have this right here, which is called a riving knife. This was a very straight board as I start to cut it. I don't know if you can tell from the camera, but if you can see there's a gap here and it's tight here. This board, as soon as I cut through it, the tension in that board just released and it sprung out. Luckily it sprung the opposite way, but that is what that riving knife is for, so it doesn't bind up on the blade. So as you can see here, this is the one that I just cut, and it's perfectly straight. This was the first cut that I made, and they're both out of the same board, but as soon as I made my cut all the way through on this board, it just sprung into that huge arc. So we'll see if we can utilize some small pieces out of that board. Otherwise, we may just have to cut another piece. So for the next cuts, I'm gonna have to change this to 2.5 inches. So it's just as simple as loosening that, set that 2.5. I'll change the other one. If you notice, when I slide my parallel guides over, there's not enough material to support it in the back, so the whole thing starts to tip. All we need to do is just take the piece that I just cut, put it behind my material, and that works as a support piece, so now it doesn't tip on me. The last board we need to rip is 3.5 inches wide, but I don't have enough material left on this piece of wood to get that 3.5 inches. So since that first board that we ripped had such a huge bow in it, we're gonna re-rip that one out of a nice straight piece. So I'll just set this to 2 3/4. I'll do the same thing down here. So originally I had planned to get all the pieces of material out of this one wide plank that I have, but because that first piece I cut had such a bad bow, I need to recut that, so I'm gonna have to grab another piece of material and cut that 2.5 inch piece out of there. So we'll just have to repeat the process of straight line ripping this first edge and then utilizing my parallel guides again to get that same exact width as we did before. So now that I've got all my material ripped to the correct widths, you can see how easy a process it was utilizing the parallel guides and the TSC. So moving forward, we need to cross cut all material, do the taper on the legs, join it with the domino joiner, and then we'll also be using the router to smooth over some edges. For doing all my cross cuts, I'm going to be using the Kapex KS120. The reason I'm choosing the Kapex is because it's fast and it's efficient, along with the dust extraction. With the extensions on here, I can set stops on my extensions right to the dimension that I want. I've already calibrated these to the Kapex itself, so I know that that's going to be exactly the dimension I want. I have to pull out a tape measure, a pencil. Anytime I do that, there's more chance of me messing up and causing mistakes. You could definitely use other methods to do crosscuts. You could use the MFT with the TS55 and set up the crosscut station that way. Today I'm just choosing to use the Kapex. So the first pieces I'm going to cut are the table legs. I need 8 pieces at 18 3/4 of an inch. So what I can do is set my flag stop now. Just flip that down, set it at 18 3/4 of an inch. I'm ready to go. So on this first cut of this board, I want to make sure that this end is perfectly square to both my sides. I know they're both parallel because I ripped them on the parallel guides. So I'm just going to flip my flag stop up out of the way and use that as a reference. And I'm going to run this board just a little bit longer, utilize my clamp, lock it into place. If you want to learn more about the Kapex, you can go to Festool USA's YouTube channel and find several videos on how to set it up there. Once that's cut to rough length, all I have to do is just flip the small piece around, put my flag stop down, bump that into place, clamp it into place. Then it's just a simple matter of sliding my bigger piece through, utilizing my stop, and making 7 other pieces the exact same length. There's no measuring involved, I'm just utilizing the stops on the Kapex. So the next pieces I'm going to cut are the frames for the tabletop. Those are going to be a different length. Something that I do a lot of times with the extensions on the Kapex is you have 2 of these flag stops. So if I'm going to be cutting a lot of pieces for a couple different tables, I can leave my one flag stop set at whatever dimension I'm cutting my legs at, and then for the picture frame, I can just simply add another flag stop, set it at whatever dimension I need. Now I can just go back and forth between the 2 flag stops. I don't have to just keep switching my flag stops. Keeps it much more accurate and much more consistent. So for the frame of the tabletop, I'm not going to cut them to exact lengths. I'm just going to get a rough length because when I go to fit everything together, then I'll be able to get my exact width and exact dimensions. So now I've got all our pieces cut for the tabletop. We've got our table legs, We've got our slats for the tabletop. We've got our picture frame for the tabletop. And then we also have our apron for underneath the tabletop. So the next step in the process is going to be the picture frame, or the frame around the outside. So the first thing I need to do is cut a 45 on one end of all of my pieces. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the laser on, that way I can see where my blade is. Tip it over to 45, make sure I lock it into place, and then I just get as close to the end as possible. So once I've got it clamped into place, I can go ahead and make the cut. Once I have the 45 cut on one end, I can come back, I can set my flag stop, and I want it to be 21 5/8, and that's going to be from the long point of the miter to the other long point of the miter. By using that flag stop, once I cut one, they're all going to be exactly the same, which will make sure that my frame is perfectly square. Now with all of them cut, I know they're exactly the same length, which is going to make sure that my tabletop frame is perfectly square. So now we're going to focus on the legs and the apron, the base of the table pretty much. So if you can see here, we've got a bevel. Rather than having a butt joint on these two corners, a nice bevel so it looks like that wood just wraps around the corner. Now, there's two different ways you can attach the legs to the apron, and two different ways you can do the taper on the legs. On the first table that I did, I'm going to actually put the apron behind the legs in this fashion. So the taper is going to start all the way at the top and taper down to an inch less than the full dimension at the bottom. The way I'm going to do it on this one is I'm actually going to come down the distance of the apron, which is 3.5 inches, and that is where I'm going to start my taper. So it'll be square down to that point, then down to -1 inch down here. So the first thing we're going to focus on is creating those bevels so I have a nice square corner on the outside of my legs. I always like doing those first before I start doing tapers, because it helps me to keep track of where my taper is actually going to go, which direction it's going to go in. So there's a couple ways you can do that. You can utilize the full MFT3 setup with the crosscut hardware. I'm going to show you a different way, a different possibility of doing it. All you need is a table, the 2 clamps, and a scrap piece of wood. And then what I'm going to do is utilize my other pieces that I have to bevel on my legs to support the back side of my guide rail. So once I have my scrap piece of wood in there and I've got my clamp in here, I'm going to go ahead and loosen that up. Then I can take my guide rail and just slide that right in there. Slide that in the other clamp. Then, because I know that I've cut this splinter guard on this guide rail to match this saw, as long as I match up the edge of my material with the edge of that splinter guard, I just clamp this down, clamp the other one down, and I can make my bevel. So now I'm going to give you a couple tips and tricks on setting the bevel of the saw, because that's what we want to make sure we're at a true 45. If we're not at 45, then your legs will be sprawled out or tipped in a little bit. So obviously loosen the front thumb screw and the back thumb screw. Once you do that, keep one hand on the base of the saw and the other one you can use to tip the saw over. We've got a detent at 45 degrees, so I already know I'm at 45. Now I want to make sure that I tighten this front thumb screw first. Let me show you. If I tighten the back thumb screw first, just like that, next thing everybody does is they bring it close to themselves, they pick it up, and they put the corner of the shoe of the saw on the table, and then they tighten this down. Well, when I did that, the weight of the saw actually pushed the front past 45 towards 0, and now I've actually got a bend in the base of the saw. So I'll just loosen that back up, loosen that front up, go back to 45. Now if I tighten the front down, it locks it in at that 45. And then the back, I don't have to worry about it. I can just tighten that down. Now I know I've got a true 45-degree bevel. If you have any more questions about setting up the TSC or the TS55, you can visit Festool USA on YouTube and watch more videos on how to set up the saws. With the way that I have it set up, all I need to do now is just pop the clamps loose, pull this one out, pull another one in, line it up, clamp it down. So once I have one leg done, I've got everything set up. It's just a matter of rinse and repeat, and then we'll have all of our legs beveled. Now that I've got all the bevels on my legs, I can start working on the tapers. Typically I like to go through and try and match up the best looking colors of the wood. I've been lucky with this piece of wood, they all look pretty close. But I'm still going to go through and go ahead and pair these up just by simply putting AA, BB, CC, and DD. You can do letters, numbers, whatever you want to do. Just whatever marks it out for you the best so you can see how they all go together. So once you have them all separated in a pile, you don't get them confused. So now that I've got everything laid out, paired together, marked the way I want it, I can show you why I always do the bevel first. When I do the bevel first, then it's much easier to lay out where the taper is going to go. Because I know if I look at these two boards, I go, okay, there's the bevel. I don't want the taper on the same side as the bevel, so that means the taper has to go on this side. So then all I need to do is just take my apron, line it flush with the top, and just put a pencil mark there, and then I can take a square to bring it across to the top. So then I've got where my taper starts up top. Come down to the bottom, measure in 1 inch from the square edge. Again, I know if I measure from the beveled edge, I'm going to be wrong. And just get a nice mark there. And if I wanted to, I could take another straight edge, line those 2 points up. Now I know that is my waist, but using this TS55 and the guide rail, I just have to have two marks. One lines up here, one lines up there. I make my cut. I've got a perfect taper. So something else I like to do to take out any chance of error, I'll get rid of a tape measure or a folding rule, and I'll just get a tri-square, mark my 1 inch, line that up. Now I know I'm set at 1 inch, so all are going to be at 1 inch. I'll use the top, I'll use the actual board, 3.5 down, 1 inch in, I'm good to go. So when I showed you how to bevel the legs, I showed you with just the guide rail and a couple clamps to do repetitive bevels. I mentioned that you could utilize the whole MFT system for crosscuts as well, and that's what I'm going to show you in this setup. So basically what I've done, I've taken the leg that I laid out before, I'm putting the piece that I want to keep underneath the guide rail, line it up with my splinter guard. Then all I did was just got a scrap piece of plywood, angled my fence rail to match what that angle is, clamp that down, Put my flag stop in there. Now all I have to do is just take 4 of my 8 pieces of legs, slide them in there, and make my cuts. For the other 4, I'll have to make a slight adjustment, which I'll show you here in a second. So now it's just a matter of repeating the process to finish all the legs. So now I need to cut the mirror image of that leg for the other taper. Now if we look, here's the piece I need to cut. If I slide it in here, I'd be cutting off the wrong side. So what I did is if I just flip it upside down, then all I have to do is put it back. It's the same exact angle. The only problem is I need to adjust front to back on my piece of material, which is simply just by moving my piece of plywood and sliding this over. So now that we've got the bevels and the tapers done on our legs, if I hold this together, it gives it a nice look for a simple leg. Next step in the process will be just to knock some of these edges over. We'll round over the long edges here. We'll do some on the aprons and part of the outer frame of our tabletop as well. To soften the edges on the parts for our table, I'm going to be utilizing the MFK 700. I've got a small round over bit in here. And I'm going to be using the vertical base. Something else I've added to it that comes with the MFK 700 is this chip catcher base. Collects all the dust and debris from the underneath side of the router. This goes on pretty simple. A little trick that I've learned when you're putting a lot of our tools together, if you look, there is a little divot in the one pin. If we look over here, there's a thumb screw. That's what's going to lock the router onto the base. Always make sure those two line up. It slides on, it locks into place. So before we get started, I need to adjust the height of my base to make sure I'm not taking off too much or too little with that bit. It's pretty simple to do. You just have to loosen this front knob and then the large knob on the side. You don't want to loosen this one. This is what just locks it to the base. So once I have that done, I usually just take a block of wood and I set it right on here so I can see right where the base is going to intersect with the router bit itself, and then I just raise and lower that bit till it's just taken off right what I want. I'd like to take off too little and too much because I can always adjust it later. Lock that into place, lock the front one, and then we're ready to go. If I need to micro adjust the height of the base, that's what this green knob is for. So once I've got my large knob here and the thumb screw in front loosened up, I can adjust this. If I want to take off more material, I turn it towards the plus side. If I want to take off less material, I turn it towards the negative side. Then I can lock it into place. I'm ready to go. If you want to know more about the MFK 700, you can visit Festool USA's YouTube channel, and you can see several videos on the MFK 700 there. So now that we've got the router all set up, the next thing I need to do is figure out how I'm going to clamp everything down. I could use our rapid clamps and the table to hold it to the table. That's just going to be more time consuming, so what I'm going to utilize is our Vaxis. I've changed out the clamping head to a smaller piece that will be narrow enough to hold our small legs. Then all I have to do is just turn it on, clamp it into place, and I'm ready to go. So once I have one edge done, I can just flip it over and do the other edge. So when starting with the legs, I'm going to start on the taper side, obviously, but I don't want to go past where my taper starts. So I've taken the time and I've marked where the base of my router is going to be to start that round over. So now that I've got the legs done, I'm going to move on to the slats for the tabletop, and I'm just going to do all 4 long edges of that. I'm not going to touch the ends at all. So now that we've got all the slats rounded over, I'm going to do the aprons. I don't want to do all 4 long edges on this because the top side is going to be attached to the bottom of my tabletop, so I just want to do the 2 bottom long edges. So we've got the roundovers done with our legs, our slats, and our apron pieces. I haven't forgot about these. These are for our picture frame. I'm going to wait till it's assembled, because if I bring that router down here, when I get to the very end, that router base is not going to have a lot of material to sit on. So when I join the 2 pieces together, I'll have a nice flat surface. I can just bring that router bit and that bearing around the corner. It gives me a nice roundover. Now we can actually see the whole thing coming together by using the domino. So the first step in the assembly process, we're going to focus on the frame of the tabletop. I want to get that together, make sure it's nice and square, all the joints line up perfectly. I've gone ahead and I've labeled everything so I know which corners are going to go together. That also lets me know what my reference face for the domino is. The reason I'm focusing on getting this done first is because I've already gone ahead and cut these, but they're cut long. I had cut these long because I want to make sure that I get a nice tight joint. So once I get that clamping pressure on there, I can cut these to length and they'll fit in there perfectly. And then I can go to dominoing those. So we're going to be using the Domino 500 for all the mortising on this project. I've got it set up with the 5mm cutter, and we're going to be using the 5 by 30mm tenons. These are the Sippo mahogany tenons. These are more for outdoor projects. They're more resistant to insects and weather. To make sure all my corners line up perfectly, I'm going to be utilizing the flaps that are on the domino. So that'll be easy. I can just reference off the corner. Now I want to put 2 tenons in each corner. So I need to go through and put 1 mark in each corner to line up with the clear plastic viewing window that's on the domino itself. If you want to learn more about the Domino 500, you can visit our Festool USA YouTube channel. So there's a couple more adjustments I will make on the domino. First, I'm going to set the fence to 90 degrees and lock that down. Next, I need to adjust the height of the domino fence, and I'm going to set that at 20. So that's 20mm. That's approximately the thickness of my material. And the last one is the plunge depth of the machine. I've already got it set to 15mm, which is half the length of my domino tenon. So something else I really like about the Vaxis is its flexibility. I can rotate it to whatever position I need, and then I'm ready to do my mortises. That first mortise that I did was a tight mortise, so it was exactly the same width as this tenon. So that's going to align the outside point of my miters, make it nice and clean looking. The next one I want to do, I don't want it to be tight. I want a little bit of movement in there. So there's adjustment on the domino. I can set it to a loose mortise, so it's a little bit wider than the actual tenon itself. To do that, I have to make sure the domino itself is turned on, and then I just turn the green dial. So now it's just a matter of repeating the process for all the different corners. With all the mortises done, now we can move into the dry fit process. So I just take one of my Sippo tenons, push that into place, loose mortise, push it together, and gives me a nice clean joint. So once I have all the tenons in, I can put it in some light clamp pressure, no glue, just dry fit, and verify that, for one, it's square, all my joints are looking good, and also that I want to make sure that these two are running perfectly parallel. So if everything's square, everything's parallel, then I can grab a final measurement for my slats. Once I have that, I can go ahead and cut one and make sure that it's fitting nice and snug, and then I can set the stops on my Capex to cut all the other ones exactly the same. So when you're cutting that very first one, take your time on it and just sneak up on that measurement. It may take one or two cuts, but you want to have a little bit of friction when you put it in there. Now this part of it's a lot of it's personal preference on how far you want to space these out. What I've actually done is I've got it to where a 12mm tenon to space this out. And you can use whatever you want. It doesn't have to be this exact spacing. You can take one of the slats out and make wider spacing. You can even add another one. You can double up 6mm tenons. You can do just about whatever you want. A lot of it's personal preference. And then once I have that done, I need to come through and mark for all my mortises. I'm not going to be able to use my flaps like I did before because this board and this board, there's no edge to reference off of. So I just need to come through. I'm going to be using that 5mm tenon again. And what I'll do is I'll just hold that up there and I'll just make marks approximately where I want them to go. Once I have my mortise locations marked out, the last thing I want to do is I want to go through and I want to mark at least one end with A, or I can mark the other end with B. I just want to make sure that when I take these all out, I don't start flipping them this direction, because if I do that, these may not line up with those marks. And then all of a sudden when I go to put it all together, I have all sorts of problems. So I want to make sure, I'll go ahead and mark A on all of these. So with everything laid out, I can go ahead and start making the mortises in both the slats and the frame. In the frame, I'm going to do tight mortises. But in the slats themselves, because I used a pencil, which has some air in it, I used my eyes to line them up, which has airs in them, I'm going to use the loose setting. So I'll get it set up and do some mortises. So with the frame done, I can adjust my Vaxis, get my slats put on here, turn this on, change it to the loose setting, and then do all the slats. So everything is dry fitted. I've got all the tenons in there. Everything lines up, all my marks line up. You've got it set up, you're ready to go. Now you can take it apart, put some glue on there, glue it back up, throw some clamps in, use your spacers, and then it'll be time to dry it out. For the process of putting the mortises in the legs is a little bit different. I'm going to use 3 total mortises. One at the top, one at the bottom, and one in the middle. For the top and bottom mortises, all I'm going to do is just reference my flaps off that top edge, off the bottom edge. Now for the middle one, all I do is I just cut a gauge block. I don't have to measure anything, just about center, and I'll reference off the bottom on all of those. That way when I do a loose mortise on the bottom and the center tenon, they'll line up no problem. So when I'm setting the height of the fence of the domino, I want to make sure that I have it as low as possible, because I want that mortise to be as close to this short point as possible. If I take it down here too far, it's going to blow out the back, which I don't want. So in setting the height, I loosen the fence, bring it all the way up, and go ahead and set it at 45 degrees first. Set that first, then get my step gauge out of the way, push that all the way down, lock it in place. Make sure you set your angle first and then bottom your fence out. With all my layout done, it's just a matter of putting 3 mortises in each leg. So now that we've got all the mortises cut, we can do dry fits with the actual domino tenons, check for a good fit, and then go for glue up. All right, so with all those dry fitted, next we can move to glue up. Now I know we still have to cut the apron, but what I want to do is get these all dried up, and then I'll actually set them on the bottom side of the table where they're going to be placed, and I can measure in between there to get my final apron measurement. So while everything else is in clamps, drying up, made another table, slightly different design, same basic principle, but now we're going to use our CMS router table to soften up the edges around here. I'm going to use a round over on the top and bottom, so when I get done, it's going to look like just a solid bull nose all the way around. I've already gone through the process of setting up the heights of the bits, the fence with the start pin. The dust extraction is all hooked up, but if you want to know more about setting it up, we've got a series of videos on the Festool USA YouTube channel that you can watch and learn more about it. So after I ran that first edge, if you look right here, looks like there's a little dip. What that actually is, I took the pressure off of the table when I was running it through there. So this is correct, this is correct, this is a high spot. So if I keep pressure on the table, hold it down to the top of the CMS, it gives me a nice fluid edge. So I'll just run that back through the CMS and clean that up. So now that I've ran it through a second time, you can see it smoothed all that out. So it's super important that you keep constant pressure on the workpiece the entire time through the router table. So now we're ready to flip it over and run all 4 edges of the other side. So you can see after we run the top and bottom, gives you a nice round over effect. Touch it up with a little sandpaper, and this top is about done. So you don't have to use a round over bit. You can also use something like a chamfer bit. There's a lot of different options. It just depends on your preference. You can also use a handheld router like our 1400 router or 2200 or a 1010 router. I prefer the CMS. It allows me to do all edges, one right after the other in a nice fluid motion. Moving forward, we need to focus on sanding. The top separately, the legs separately, and then the apron separately. So with the legs drying out in the clamps, I can focus on the tabletop. Now I'd already glued this up, put it in the clamps, pulled it back out, and then I ran it through the router table and put that round over on the edges. Now I can focus on sanding. You could sand everything once it's all assembled with the legs and the apron. I find it much easier just to do it piecemeal. I can sand the top separately, the legs separately, and then the apron separately. So I've got, starting out with 80 grit because I've got a little bit of glue left on here, so that'll knock down the glue. I can jump up to 100, 120, maybe 150. I don't like going any higher than that because it'll affect the finish. From there, we can start sanding everything else. I'm going to be using the ETS EC150. It's a 6-inch random orbit sander, like I said, with 80 grit to start out. So we'll get started and go from there. So for the ETS EC150, I'm going to turn the suction all the way up. For sanding this bare wood, I'm just going to run the speed of the sander all the way at 6. So I started out with 80 grit abrasive on here. I could have started with 100 grit. I would have had to sand much longer. You always want to start with a lower grit. That way you're not forcing yourself to put a lot of pressure on the sander. Everybody's guilty of it. They start with a higher grit thinking they're not going to have to sand as long, but then they force the sander down. When you do that, you slow down the orbit of the abrasive or the pad, and that creates swirl marks. So to overcome that, start with a lower grit, work your way all the way up through the other grits. So now that I got it flipped over, I can continue sanding with my 80 grit abrasive. I like doing it that way. I'll sand both sides at 80, change to 100, sand both sides at 100, and just follow my grit progression all the way up. Now that I have 100 grit on there, I can repeat the process on both sides. Now we're ready for 120. With the top all finished up, we can start working on the legs. So with the top done, we can start clamping this in place to start sanding the legs down. We'll be using the same grip progression. We're going to change up the sanders, and we're going to be using the DTS 400 that'll allow me to get into these corners really nicely. For the DTS 400, since it's more of a light finish sander, I'm going to go ahead and turn the suction down almost all the way. Just like on the ETS EC, I'm going to leave this at full speed. So I switched up the clamping elements a little bit here to hold the leg in an upright position, and now I'm going to switch over back to my ETS EC150/5. So we've got the tabletop sanded, I've sanded the legs, and I went ahead and sanded the aprons as well. So now I can work on placement of the legs, cut the aprons to fit, and then bring it all together so we have a finished table. So now that we've got everything sanded, the next step in the process is to join the legs to the apron. All I'm going to do is just line two of my legs up right on the inside of the outer frame. Take one of my aprons, butt the apron up to one leg, and then just simply take a pencil, scribe exactly where I want to cut. Then I can take it over the Capex, cut all of them exactly the same since we made sure that this was perfectly square. All my aprons are cut the same. Then it's just a simple matter of putting 2 domino mortises in each leg, joining them together, gluing them up, and then we can work on attaching the leg and apron assembly to the table. So with all the aprons cut to length, we can focus on putting the mortises in for all the domino tenons. With the Domino 500, there's a support base that it comes with. On that support base, it has an extra reference point because these flaps are 37 millimeters from the flap to the center of my mortise, which in turn means you're 37 millimeters from the edge down. I don't want to be 37 millimeters because that's going to make my mortises too close. So I can put in this reference point, that now makes it 20 millimeters. So now I can come 20 millimeters off of here, 20 millimeters off of here, and it's perfect. For the legs, same thing, I'll reference off of here, come down 20 millimeters, and I drew a reference line that I'll reference off of because I don't have a corner to rest my flap against. I'll get all those mortises done, we can put the dominoes in, glue it up, and we'll be ready to go. So the reason I only did 1 on each end is that way I don't have to change this flap each time I rotate the board around. So now I can go to the other side. Now I can do all the opposite sides of each board. All right, so now we've got the legs set up and our clamping elements. I've got my first flap down, my 20 millimeter flap. I'll reference it off the edge, make my mortise, shut the machine off, put both flaps in, and then just line my center mark up with my pencil line, make that mortise, and repeat the process on the rest of the legs. I'm just pushing the last dry fit of the apron to the leg. Align it just to make sure on my spacing. Everything looks good, so I can throw some glue on it, some clamps, and then we can start the process of joining the bottom assembly to the tabletop assembly. So now we've got the base assembly glued up on this table. The top's done. We can turn to this table and I can show you how I attach the base assembly to the tabletop here. Basically all I did was cut 2 small blocks of wood out of the cypress, put a wide mortise in both of these, and then I put a tight mortise with a domino glued into the apron here. Then all I have to do is just slide that into place, and once I have the base adjusted to where I want, just run a couple screws into some pre-drilled holes. Do the same on the other block. I have a nice sturdy connection point. So now that we've got the tabletops attached to the base assemblies on both tables, we can do a little touch-up sanding, make sure everything's looking good the way we want it. And then we can think about how we want to finish the table. It's completely up to you. You can paint it, you can leave it natural, let it gray in the sun and the weather, or you can put a polyurethane on it and just let the grain shine through. Personally, that's the route I would go, but it's your table, just enjoy it.